Hey there guys, Spexy here, welcoming you back to yet another piping hot slice of video game history. And this one might get a bit sour in the mouth because it starts with a game that is said to have brought the entire gaming industry to its knees. The year 1982, just coming up to Christmas, and the much anticipated E.T. game by Atari was about to be released for the Atari 2600.
Only from Atari. Made especially for systems from Atari. The video game that lets you help E.T. get home. Just in time for Christmas. Happy holidays.
The game of course has become world renowned for its terrible gameplay, some even stating it to be the worst game ever made, and its sales figures reflected this, leading single-handedly to the video game crash of 1983. Yeah, total bollocks obviously, as we hardly felt a tremor here in the UK and Europe, and I'm pretty sure Japan and pretty much the rest of the world except the US and Canada were all doing quite alright as well. But in the land where the console was king and computers were predominantly business machines and far too expensive to be considered mere gaming platforms, a game which was hyped up to be the greatest thing since sliced bread ending up being a great big steaming bucket full of pig shit was a massive deal. When word got out of the game's total shittiness, the sales obviously plummeted, the stock market reflected this, and video games as a whole seemed to fall suddenly out of favour with the investors. Although I'm pretty sure there were still many keen players wanting new games, the money just wasn't there to make them. It would seem that the bubble had finally burst. And we all know the rest of the story about that. It took a fair while for the US gaming industry to pull back and recover with the help of a certain Japanese company and an Italian plumber. So could one game really bring about such calamity? And can it really be as bad as everyone makes out? Well, I for one would not label it the worst game ever made. That title could go to many more games that I feel are fundamentally and technically far worse than E.T. Yeah, the game isn't great, not by a long shot, but considering the time given to write it, I feel that Howard Scott Warshaw did an admirable job. I mean, 5 weeks? Like, what the fuck, Atari? What were you expecting? Okay, admittedly Howard had worked on a couple of big games for Atari before E.T., foremost Yar's Revenge, which may seem quite basic by today's standards, but was a pretty addictive and fun little game in its day, and Raiders of the Lost Ark, another blockbuster movie tie-in, and being a partly Spielberg production, probably the single biggest reason that Howard was handpicked for the task of making the E.T. game. In fact, looking at Raiders, you can see a few similarities in the overall look and feel of the gameplay. The difference is that Raiders was not made in just 5 weeks, giving Howard the time to buff and polish the finished product, making it a playable game at the end of it. Though I still think it's a pretty poor one, to be fair. Tasked with making a game that, according to Spielberg himself, he wanted to feel like the movie, Howard attempted to make something a little more interactive, getting the players to explore the various locations, trying to locate all the parts of E.T.'s intergalactic communications device on which he could phone home. A little ambitious? I'd certainly say so, particularly on an Atari 2600, but playing it you can get a feel of what he was actually going for, and with a little extra time he might have actually managed. Instead we are left with a barely playable mishmash of screens, a ton of pits all over the shop to fall into, which E.T. can somehow levitate out of by stretching his neck. Yeah, I don't remember him being able to do that in the movie. And worst of all, no real idea of what the hell is going on or how to go about completing your mission. And to top it off, on completion of the game, Atari didn't waste any time with game testers or reviewers before placing the biggest order ever made in video game history at the time, assuming success based purely on pulling in punters in time for Christmas and predicted box office sales figures for the movie. I mean, it was a Spielberg movie. What could possibly go wrong? Well, I guess you could end up with something totally shit that nobody really wanted, and those that did buy it demanding refunds because they felt ripped off and misled by the hype, and the total bollocks that they actually got when putting the cartridge into their beloved 2600s. The result, a ton, or several tons to be more accurate, of completely unsellable games with nowhere left to go but the bin. Once just an urban myth, but proved true in 2014 when excavations of a suspected New Mexico landfill location did uncover copies of E.T. along with many other titles that all ended up being buried back in 1983. So with such a big mistake made by the industry and with E.T. at the heart of it all, would anyone dare to go near the franchise or to make another E.T. based game? You betcha they would, and I'm going to be taking a look at all of them over the years. And to be honest, the first game was pretty much hot on the tail of the movie in 1983, the same year as the crash itself. Yet this time, it's not an official product and produced by a Taiwanese developer working with a European distributor. The game UFI Ungefährlicher Einsatz, which translates as UFI and its dangerous use. Not an actual ET game then, but based on an alien which has to look around the maze-like levels, finding parts to his spacecraft in order to go home. Yeah, so there's a loose connection there. The levels contain several alcoves placed around the screen, and the alcoves can either turn you blue and trigger a dot to appear in one of the maze corners, or unleash a monster which will chase you around the screen trying to prevent you from completing your task. Moving through the stripy section seems to act like a trap, holding you in position for a few seconds whilst producing a high-pitched tone. Not only could this get you killed by the monsters, which can pass through these unscathed, but also deafen you if you're wearing headphones, which incidentally I was when recording my gameplay here. Each of the uncovered corner dots will represent a part of your spacecraft. As you can imagine, this gets rather tedious rather quickly, going back and forth to the dots and alcoves over and over again, and then trying to remember which ones contained which parts, but at least it does add some kind of semblance of a challenge to the game, which, let's face it, isn't terrible, but then it isn't anything to do with ET either, so why have I even mentioned it? Well, also in the very same year, this very same game had several different releases under different names. They were Das Raumschiff, the spaceship, yeah, okay, that makes some kind of sense I guess. E.T. will nach Hause, E.T. wants to go home, so now we're sailing into dangerous legal waters. E.T. Go Home, a very simple and straight to the point title. I like it. And as you can see from the box art here, they even include some imagery which could be called copyright infringing. And then presumably after some legal action, or at least the fear or threat of it, the game was renamed to Go Go Home and Go Go Home Monster. Even the box art has changed by this point, with the obvious copyright infringing imagery changed to something a little bit more generic beast looking. Then we have Colin. This time changing the character to a robot and giving him a supposedly humorous name, presumably instead of Colin. Oh yeah, very heroic. But I like to call him Colon. And finally, Aliens Return, which ironically is the game's original working title before any of that greed-driven bandwagon jumping nonsense. And whilst we're talking about jumping on the ET bandwagon, there were another couple of games released for the home computers of the time that definitely weren't afraid to abuse that ET licensing for their own game. First up then we have a game simply titled E.T. Now this was programmed by Nigel Stewart in 1983 for Macronic Systems Limited and released in Spain by Investronics. Yeah, so it's basically a series of little games, the main one being this one here where the spaceship lands and E.T. must find his way through the forest, picking up what I think is supposed to be candy and trying to make his way through without being caught by, I'm guessing, the FBI agents. Not quite sure what that van is, who that guy is who shoots at you, but he kills you if he touches you, and yeah, it's all pretty basic. Well, it is basic. It was programmed in BASIC, and actually you can just break it open by pressing any of the keys apart from the ones that control ET, which are 5, 6, 7 and 8. Yeah, so it's a very basic, boring game. The other levels aren't much better. We have one where the whole thing is invisible. You can't see where you're going, it's just trees, making it almost impossible. And we have one with ghosts and pumpkins, which you have to avoid. I guess it's something to do with the Halloween section of ET, but if you touch them you die. You've also got the guy chasing you. If you touch him you die, and you have to get to the house at the top of the screen in order to get off the level. When I did that, I also died. And then we have the final one, which is trying to fly the spaceship through space, I think, but I wasn't able to control it at all, and pretty much died the second that anything got near me. And it's all pretty rubbish, to be fair. Yeah, I'm glad I didn't see it at the time. The only reason I'm showing you it is because it's related to ET, and so is this video. Otherwise, I wouldn't even bother. So here we have E.T. the Extra Terrestrial for the VIC-20. Again, I'm thinking this is a homebrew game. Not sure who programmed it. The premise, well, simply pick up the sweets off the floor, avoid landing on the spikes, avoid getting shot by the gun which is constantly behind you, and every now and then a phone will appear which you'll need to answer for bonus points, and that is about it. It's kind of like a very early version of the dinosaur game from Google. I mean, this is simple beyond belief. It's not that bad a game, I guess, for someone programming it at home. Is it anything to do with ET? Very loosely. I like the background with the fingers there touching in a very Michelangelo God and Man type way. But yeah, it's definitely not a great game by any means, so let's move on and see what else we can find. And what we found is a Frogger clone? Seriously? That's what the game developer thought when they watched the movie. This film would make an excellent Frogger clone. Okay then. You have to control E.T. and work your way up the screen to... Oh, come on! You don't need me to tell you how to play Frogger. The game's an absolute classic, and this game replicates it fairly well. Except that instead of the lily pad homes at the top to jump into, we now have 3 bikes and 3 bike baskets, which you have to jump into instead. Once you do, the bike will then travel across to the right hand side of the screen, placing you in the spaceship. And I guess if we have 3 Elliots, then we might as well have 3 ETs that need to all be put into the spaceship to complete each level. As you progress, the designs of the platforms will change slightly and things get slightly harder. But is it really an ET game? In gameplay? Well, it's loose to say the least, and certainly not worthy of bearing the franchise name, but not an entirely bad game by any means. Moving on then to the second Ty99 4A release, E.T. Adventures at Sea. Well, it looks okay, I think, though E.T. made no voyages on the high seas in the movie that I can remember, so maybe he came back for a jolly jaunt with Elliot a little later on, but let's not let that get in the way of the gameplay. And when I say gameplay, that's a loose term because this is more of an educational title. The aim is simple, to sail around the Earth, avoiding the whirlwinds and other obstacles, to dock at several different random ports. At each port you will be asked a geographical question in order to obtain a vital clue to the whereabouts of your mothership's landing location, so that you can go home. Obviously, duh. You must answer each question correctly to gain your clue, and when you have gathered all of the clues, or you just think you're big brain enough to know the answer, you can press G at any time to guess it. After docking at the correct landing location, a more action-based level follows, seeing you collect a series of buoys from around the screen whilst avoiding waves, boats and snakes to unlock a path to the top section of the screen and your spaceship ride home. Yes, it really is that simple and easy, but then it was made for young kids, remember. Although not much of a game in terms of content, I do think a little effort has gone into the design of E.T. at least. Okay, so he'd look better brown than grey, but he does at least bear some resemblance to the character, which is nice. All in all, it's a fair attempt at sticking to the franchise in looks, though as I said before, E.T.'s globe-trotting escapades have little to nothing to do with the movie. Now, Looking Glass did plan a further 2 games in this series, E.T. in his adventures on land and E.T. in his adventures in the air, but playing this one it's clear to see why those games never got a release. Now I guess it's not that bad as far as educational games go, and at least it looks like it is official, but it's certainly nothing to phone home about. So, not content with nearly destroying the console gaming market, Atari took their chances in making yet another ET based game, E.T. Phone Home, in 1983, this time for the Atari 8-bit home computers. Though it's immediately clear that a little more thought has gone into the development with this game, although the premise still remains pretty much the same. You start off the game this time as Elliot, who must wander around a much more discernible map this time around, still looking for the parts of E.T.'s remarkable space phone. Parts can be located randomly around the map and you will need to find each and every last one of them, returning them home one by one to your house block to give to E.T. Holding down the action button will show you the parts that you have already found and the ones you're still looking for, and you can also see your lives represented as flowers at the side of the screen. These will disappear one at a time each time that your health bar reaches 0. Upon collecting all of the parts you will find yourself playing as E.T. himself, and this time you must make your way across to the top left side of the map where you will find a forest clearing where you can call your family to come and pick you the hell up. As you can see, it all makes a lot more sense than the 2600 game ever did. The spaceship also looked pretty good for its time, and it plays fairly well, just a little too easy to complete for my liking, but then I guess they were aiming at a somewhat younger audience. It does go to show though that with a little extra effort and time, not to mention a more powerful machine, you can accomplish something decent. The lesson here I guess is not to expect miracles in mere weeks, and this game goes to prove it. So then, would this be the last time we'd see E.T. in a video game? Surprisingly, no. But that's content for another video. Suffice to say it took a further 18 years before anyone dared step foot near the E.T. franchise again, and probably for very good reason, but you'll have to wait and see. Aww. If you enjoyed this video, as always, why not spank the hell out of that thumbs up button, and don't forget to subscribe for more retro goodness. I've been Spexy, you've been Out of This World, and I look forward to looking backwards with you again in the next video. See you soon, bye for now.